Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Impact. In today's lecture, we will discuss what is culture, what is language, and how the culture and language they are interrelated. What does it mean by the Sapir Whorf Hypothesis? We will discuss some of its examples, and then at the last, we will draw a conclusion of the Sapir Whorf Hypothesis and the relationship of the culture and language. So let's start. Okay, first we have to look into the definition of culture. What is culture? We have discussed culture in detail in our last lectures. I have made lecture on the definition of culture in detail and also its types and characteristics. But for now, I will discuss culture in brief. Culture can be defined as the culture of a group consists of shared, socially learned knowledge and the patterns of behavior. Culture is shared means that it is not something that is possessed by the individual by individual alone, but it is something that is shared by the majority members of the society. And also that it is socially learned knowledge means it's not something that rely on our instinct characteristics, but it's something that we learn through the socialization and acculturation, through the socialization and inculturation. It is the knowledge that we acquire from our ancestors and also when we grow up in a particular society, along with also from the peer groups and also from the different institutions. So the culture rely on our social learning rather than our instinct behaviors, and these are also provide a patterns of behavior, as culture can help us to understand the behavior of the other and to predict the behavior. For example, in case of as I have been grown up in a Pakistani society, so I can predict the behavior of my other fellows on Eid day because I know that how the people in Pakistan they greet together. It is the culture that actually make me enabled to predict the behavior of my fellows, and it is a culture that provide a patterns of behavior that are more consistent in our society. So the culture of a group consists of shared socially learned knowledge and the patterns of behavior. So it means that culture includes what we think, how we perceive particular idea, how we make sense of a justice, how we make sense of our women rights. These are all our thinking and our ideas, the belief system. These are all our culture, and also what we own in the form of the material culture, like our devices, our tools that we use. For example, what kind of devices do we prefer? These are all our material culture. And also how we act. Our actions are also part of our culture. How we greet with each other, how we speak, how we perform the different rituals and ceremonies. These are all our culture. So culture can be defined as a shared socially learned knowledge and the patterns of behavior. Now the other is that what is language? Before we go into detail that what is culture and what is language, and to understand the relationship between them, we must be able to grab the concept of language and culture. And the language can be defined as a shared knowledge of sounds, words, meanings, and grammatical rules that are used to send and receive messages. As language is a component of a culture, it is a part of a culture, and culture, as we have discussed, is a shared knowledge. So of course language is also a shared knowledge, but shared knowledge of what? Shared knowledge of sounds, words, meanings, and grammatical rules. These are the sounds to which we have attained some kind of conventional meanings, and also there are some rules and standards in order to learn a particular language. There are some grammatical rules which we have to follow in order to communicate in that language. So these all collectively form a language that we use to send and receive messages that mostly uses a communication medium. So we can say that language is a shared knowledge of sounds, words, meanings, and grammatical rules that are used to send and receive messages. This is how can we define language, okay? Now, before we go into detail of the relationship of the culture and language, we must be able to understand some of the components of the language. There are various components of language. We will discuss in this lecture 4 major components. First are the phonetics. Phonetics deals with the sounds of the language, that how we articulate different sounds in a particular language. For example, how we articulate T in English language. This is the phonetics. So how we articulate the sounds of a language, this is our phonetics. So the study of the sound system of the language is called phonology, and how we articulate sound, this is the phonetics. So for example, there might be that when we pronounce a word, there is a word that is alphabetically present, but its phonetics is absent. For example, in case of the U, when we pronounce U, there is the spelling of U is Y-O-U, but when we pronounce it, the sound of the O is absent, okay? So we can say that phonologically the O is absent, but when we pronounce the U. Then the other is the morphology. Morphology deals that how the different sounds they combine to form meaning. This is the morphology. So morphology is concerned about the meaning of the sounds in a particular language. For example, we have the word like cat and dog that have meaning, that are the common nouns. So these are the morphology. And remember that we have two types of morphology in case of the English language, that are the free morphemes and the bound morphemes. Free morphemes are those that can stand alone as a word, like for example desire or possible or health or anthropology or sociology. These are the words that can make full sense even if they are used in isolation. But there are some other words like which must be used in with other words in order to make full sense. For example, I say anti. I know that anti gives a meaning like against, but it can't give a full sense until I use it with another word along with other word. For example, I use it antithesis, anti-Semitic, Pakistan. These are the words that make full sense when used with another language. So these are the bound morphemes. Okay. Then the other are the syntax. Syntax actually concerned that how the words in a particular language, they are arranged to form the sentences that convey meaning. For example, she is in the room, I am delivering a lecture. Different words have been arranged in a particular manner to give a complete sentence which give a full meaning. So this is the syntax. Then the semantics. Semantics that grabs the meaning of the sound. It deals with the meaning of the words. For example, there might be a possibility that there is a word that gives different meaning when used by the different dialect of a similar language. For example, in case of the foot, when it is used in a standard English, it refers to the small part of the leg, but in case of the Creole English, which is a different dialect, they refers to the both leg and foot. So the same word, when they are used by a people who have different dialect, even of particular language, of a same language, they give different meanings. So semantics actually discuss the meaning of these languages, the meaning of these words, sorry. So what does it mean by dialect? Dialect is actually the variation within a single language, maybe based on factors like regions, subculture, ethnic identity, or socioeconomic class. When they have different dialect means that they have there are variations within a similar language. Okay, so these are the components of language. Now, what are the link between the language and culture? Language and culture, they are both tightly intertwined with each other. They both affect each other, and in fact it is the language that actually provide our basis of understanding of our culture. In this lecture we will discuss some of the functions of the language that it performs, which actually directly affect our culture. So first is that language actually provides shared past. It helps us to have the shared past. By attaching words to an event, we are able to communicate it with others, and it then using those words to recall it, we are able to discuss the events. If we don't have a language, we will not able to talk about the tragedies that we have collectively passed through. For example, if I want to discuss an event, for example, at any party, I want to discuss it with my friend, I must need a language, a medium through which I communicate with my fellows in order to talk about our shared past. So this is our language that actually enables us to discuss about the past events. And the other is that it also happens to have the shared future. For example, without language, we will not be able to plan for a future. We will not able to share our planning with others. So it is actually the language that actually making it possible for us to share our future plans with our fellows. And similarly, language is a medium of our expression. Language allows culture to develop by freeing people to move beyond their immediate experiences, and it also helps them to express their emotions and their feelings with others. How I'm feeling now, either good or bad, it is the language through which I communicate with others, and it is the language through which they will receive my message and they will get the point that what I want to say. So without the language, we can't land our message clearly. And then the shared behavior. It is our language that actually helps us to have the shared behavior. Language enables us to establish a purpose for getting together. For example, if you want to go on a picnic, you will use your speech not only to plan the picnic, but also to decide on reason for having the picnic. So it is our language that is actually enabling us to have the goal-oriented behavior and also have the shared behavior with my other fellows. And also that it provides us the shared perceptions. For example, when we talk about with one another, we are exchanging ideas about a particular event. So in that way, we are able to share our perceptions with others, and our words are actually the embodiments of our experiences. So talking about events allows us to arrive at the shared understanding that form the basis of our social life. So this is how the language affect our lives. So we can say, we can conclude that language actually is the basis of our culture. Okay, without the language we can't build a culture, because our shared past, our shared future, our shared behavior, our shared perception, these all are the shared things. And we have discussed in the definition of culture that culture is shared. Okay, so without the language we will not be able to build our culture. Okay, we will not be able to build our non-material culture. These all our non-material culture. So we will not be able to communicate. We will not be able to send our message, and also to understand it, what does he want to say. So we will not have the send and receive message communication if we don't have a language. So it is the language that actually providing a basis in order to understand our culture, and also provide a basis over which our culture build. So this is the interrelation of the language and culture. In order to delve deeply into the connection of the language and culture, we must grab the concept of the Sapir Whorf Hypothesis. This is one of the influential and one of the well-known theory in order to understand the relationship between the language and culture. Now, before we go into the statement of the Sapir Hypothesis, here is the brief biography of Sapir and Whorf. Sapir was an anthropologist and Whorf was a linguist, and they gave this hypothesis in 1930s. Sapir and Whorf, an anthropologist and the linguist, they combined their work in 1930s, and they derive a hypothesis which we call the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now, they for the first time gave this hypothesis when they noted that the Hopi Indians, they have no word for different time frames, because in case of the English language, if you observe, there are past tense, we have the present tense, and also we have the future tense. We have three type of tenses in different time frame. But in case of the Hopi Indians, they don't have the past tense. So they mostly think of the passage of time as something that is continuously unfolding, that is continuously streaming, that is continuously flowing. So they actually view the time as a kind of the stream of flow that is ever going. Okay. So they mostly think of the events as something that is continuously unfolding, just because that their language don't have a past tense, and which is totally different structure as compared to the English language. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the Sapir and Whorf, when they for the first time noted that the Hopi Indians, they don't have a word for the different time frames. So it might be a possibility that the Hopi Indians, they view time differently as compared to the English speakers. And then the Sapir and Whorf, they raise a question that does our dialect influence how we see the world? Does our language impact how we make the sense of our surrounding? Yes, it does. Okay, and then it was explained by the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So the Sapir hypothesis is also known as the Linguistic Relativity hypothesis. And this was the brief biography of Sapir and Whorf. Now we will look into the statement of the Sapir hypothesis. According to this, the idea that language influences the perceptions and thought patterns of those who speak it and thus condition their worldview, this is the Sapir hypothesis. It means that the language influences our perception, how we see the world, how we see the surrounding, how we make sense of a justice, how we make sense of different concepts. These all are shaped by our language. Just because that we are speaking different language as compared to the other. For example, if I'm Urdu speaker, my perception towards the things will be different from the people who speak Spanish, because I don't know Spanish. Okay, so my perception of things as compared to the Spanish speaker, how they perceive things, they'll be totally different. Their perception will be different. This is according to a Sapir hypothesis, that people of the speaker of the different languages, they see the world differently. They make the perceptions of the world differently. Now, how is it? How the people of the different languages see the world differently? We will discuss some of the examples in our next slide. Okay, but this statement was precisely given by the Floyd in his work, which was the Interpersonal Communication, which was published in 2009. Floyd actually gave a precise statement of the Sapir hypothesis. This is that the language impacts the way that the individuals of a culture see the world. It means that our language impact how we see the world of our surrounding, how we see the world, how we make sense of the world. This is heavily influenced by our language. This is the precise statement which was given by the Floyd of the Sapir Whorf hypothesis. Now, we will now discuss some of the examples, and now it will become clear that how the language influences our perception of the world. Okay, so before we go into the detailed examples of the Sapir hypothesis, there are two pieces, or we can say two principles of the Sapir hypothesis, that are the linguistic determinism and linguistic relativism. Before we go into detail the linguistic relativism, first we have to discuss linguistic determinism. Linguistic determinism states that it is the structure of the language that determines how we think of the world. It is our language that is affecting how we think of the world. This is the linguistic determinism. And how is it? How it affects our perception? Let's discuss two examples of this. Okay, first example, for example, in case of the Solomon Islands, across the Solomon Islands, there is a prominent language which the people speak there, and in that language there are 9 words for coconuts. Coconuts is a high value commodity there. So they have 9 words in their language for coconut. Remember that in English language, we don't have the 9 words for it, nor in Urdu, nor in Hindi language. So in case of the Solomon Island, the people of the Solomon Island, they speak the language that have 9 words for coconut. Okay, and it is considered one of the highly valued commodity there. And these 9 words are actually used to refer to the different stages of the coconut growth. For example, in case of the nani is the word that is refers to the young and green coconut, usually used for drinking. The second word which they use, that is the yora, a slightly older coconut still containing a drinkable water and a soft flesh. Then the third word which they use, that is the makimeka, is a mature coconut primarily used for cooking or oil extraction. The fourth word which they use, that is the copra, the dry coconut meat used for making oil. The fifth word which they use, that is the rari, a husk or fiber of the coconut used for making ropes or mats. So these are some of the words, and also 4 other words which they use for coconut. The 4 other words include mali mali is the coconut leaves or fronds used in roofing or weaving. For the other word that they use, they are pale, coconut ready for planting, often with a sprout. Also, they call a coconut a cocono, is the shell of the coconut, often used as a container or tool. And also they call a coconut a vato, a fully mature coconut used for grating or other purposes. So these are the 9 words which are used by the speakers of the Solomon Islands for the coconut. Now remember that according to a Sapir Whorf hypothesis, as they have 9 words for coconut in their language, so it will actually affect their perception towards this commodity. So the people of the Solomon Island will view the coconut differently as compared to the English speakers, because we don't have 9 words in our language for coconut. So it might be a possibility that people of the Solomon Island, they give more importance to a coconut. They think of the coconut as if the high value commodity as compared to the English speaker, because we don't have enough words for it. Okay, so this is how our language is affecting our perception towards a particular thing. Another example could be the Philippines. They have 92 words for rice, which is unlike the other countries. Philippines have 92 words for rice, which is unlike the English language, also the Urdu or Hindi language. We don't have 92 words for rice. So in case of the Philippines, rice is considered a more highly valued commodity there. And it may be because their language have 92 words for it. So according to a Sapir Whorf hypothesis, just because their language have 92 words for it, it is totally different than our English language, than our Urdu language. So that's why the people of the Philippines, they view rice differently as compared to us. We usually view rice as an ordinary commodity, but in case of the Philippines, they will view rice as a high value commodity. They will give it more value, maybe because that their languages have 92 words for it, so it is shaping their perception of it towards the rice. So this is how the people of the speakers of the different languages, they view the things differently. Now, the second principle of the Sapir hypothesis is the linguistic relativism. Linguistic relativism is the principle which is based on which is actually built over the principle of the linguistic determinism, and it states that just because our language determines our perception of reality, which is actually the linguistic relativism. So people who speak different languages will see the world differently. It means that the people, as we are claiming that according to linguistic determinism, that our language is determining our perception, so it means that the people who will speak different languages will of course give them a different, it will of course give them a different perception of the world. So it will actually, the people of the different languages will see the world differently. And according to linguistic relativism, it means that the person who know more languages will lead to a wider perception of the world. For example, I am Urdu speaker, and my native language is, for example, I know 3 languages. As a Pakistani, my native language is Pashto, and I know Urdu languages because it's the official language of my country, and I also know the English language. So if a person, they know more languages, according to Sapir Whorf Hypothesis, will lead to the wider perception of the world, because they will able to understand that how I'm now able to understand that how the people who speak Pashto, they perceive things, and also that how the people who speak Urdu, how they perceive things, and then the English, so how they perceive things. So the speakers of the different languages see the world differently. So it means that the people who speak different languages will give them opportunity to have the wider perception of the reality, wider perception of the world. And also the second, according to linguistic relativism, that if language has no word for a particular idea, then they can't understand the concept the way others do. In order to understand the concept, you must have a word in your language for that. And there is example of it. For example, in case of the Cameroon tribal community, where there is no word for snow, there is no word for snow. So they are not able to understand the concept of snow. Even the Cameroon tribe believe, the people of the Cameroon tribe believe that there is no such reality like snow. We do have a word for snow in our English language. That's why we are able to get this concept. But in case of the Cameroon tribal people, they don't have a word for snow. So they mostly believe that there is nothing, snow is not a reality, it's just an abstract. There is nothing like such thing as snow that exists in our world. So in order to understand a concept, you must have a word for it, according to linguistic relativism. So it means there was a professor, the assistant professor, whose name was the Hadi Arnett, and who actually made the linguist, and the linguist explained an issue which he was coming across, because he was doing a biblical translation in a Cameroon tribal language. He was trying to translate the Bible into the Cameroon tribal language, and he discussed this issue with his assistant professor and say that I am not able to find a word that can help me to translate the phrase which was in Bible, that was whiter than snow. Whiter than snow. I wasn't able to translate it into the Cameroon tribal language because they don't have a word for snow. They don't understand that what does it mean by snow. They even don't perceive snow as a reality. They even don't believe that snow is a reality. So the linguist actually explained this issue to that linguist, to the assistant professor, and say that he wasn't able to convince their people that snow is a reality because their people don't have a word in their language for snow, so they wasn't able to grasp my concept. So they will not understand. It means that, and in case of the Cameroon tribe, they have also never experienced the snow because they don't have magazines, they don't have television. It is a tribe that is, far out from the mainstream world. So one of the challenging tasks which was faced by the linguist is to find the word that matters to these folks. And his job was to find something in their culture that means something similar to our whiter than snow. He was looking for a word that are more close to the snow in their language, so then he will able to convey his message to them. But he in vain, because there wasn't a word like this in their language. So according to linguistic relativism, if you don't have a word for a particular concept, you will not be able to grab that concept. This is all what linguistic relativism mean, and we can quote the example of the Cameroon tribal language where there is no word for snow. Okay, then we can discuss some of the examples. These are the examples that come under the umbrella of the linguistic determinism and also under the linguistic relativism. These are the examples of the Sapir Whorf hypothesis. In case of the Mandarin culture, which is the Chinese culture, there is a word which means love. Lao is a word which they use respect for the elderly. Now remember that in case of the English language, we have a word respect and also we have a word elderly, but we don't have a particular word which can particularly illustrate respect for the elderly, which can use solely for the respect for the elderly. We don't have a word for this. So in case of the Mandarin culture, they give more priority to this concept like respect for the elderly. They give priority to this, but in case of the English speakers, they don't give priority to the respect for the elderly. According to Sapir Whorf Hypothesis, it is because that the Mandarin culture has a language which has a word lao in their language and which is actually shaping their perception to think about this phenomena differently as compared to the English speakers and to give it more priority to it. Okay, so in case of the America, we have a word respect and elder but not a whole word for it. So this concept will be viewed differently in our society. So this is how the Sapir Whorf hypothesis interpret that just because that they have a word in their language, so it is affecting their perception, and it is just the reason that how the people of the Mandarin culture view this concept differently than the English speakers. Now there is a question arise that is it that they respect their elders because the word exists in their language, or does the word exist in their language because they have such respect for their elders? It is a sort of chicken egg theory, and different anthropologists they have this is one of the debatable issue in the Sapir hypothesis, that either the Mandarin culture has word, that's why they give more respect to the elders, or it's because that they have a culture to give more respect to the elders, that's why they have developed a word in their language, because language is also not something instant, it is made by the people, it is something formed by the people of the society themselves. They add conventional meanings to the symbols, and in that way the language form. So either it is because that the culture leads to the emergence of this word in their language, or is it because that they have a word in their language allow, that's why they have more respect for the elder. Then the other example could be that for the English speaker, there is a word which is the nurse. Okay, in English there is a word nurse which actually refers to the almond, walnuts, and pecans. These are the nurse is an overarching word that refers to all these commodities collectively. This is a collective word for all these commodities. So as the English speakers, they have a word that is a collective word for all these items. So this overarching word is compelling the English speakers to think of these items as the belonging items, as the connecting items, according to the Sapir hypothesis. But on the other hand, there is a Spanish language where there is no such overarching word. So they don't view any kind of connection between the almonds, walnuts, and pecans, because they don't have any kind of collective word for it. So this is according to a Sapir hypothesis that we are viewing a kind of connection among these items, and we believe that these are the belonging items because we have a word in our language. But in case of the Spanish, they don't have a word in their language to show any kind of connection among these items. That's why they don't view these items as a connecting things or as a belonging item. They don't view them as a belonging item because they don't have an overarching word for this. So this is how the people of the different languages, they perceive the things differently. Then the other example could be, for example, the research which was conducted by the Max Planck Institute of the Psycholinguistics, and they do their investigation and they conducted their research in order to understand that the people who speak different languages, they talk about space and location differently. And they draw a conclusion that for English speakers, as we are using the absolute references and relative references when we are talking about the space and location. For example, absolute references means we use cardinal directions like north, west, east, and north, east, west, south. These are the absolute references, okay? And relative references, left, right, above, or below. The relative references are those that are mostly relative to the location of the speaker. So as we have these both types of the references in our language, so we talk about the directions differently as compared to the other, okay? In case, for example, we English speakers, they use the absolute references, for example, head north to get there, or south of town. And also they use the relative references, for example, on my left, or we use above you or below. These are the words that we use in different contexts. So the absolute and relative references, they are used by the English speakers, and in case of the other community, like which is the Yugo-Yamithir community, Yugo-Yamithir language, sorry, and there is a community that is the Aboriginal community. Yugo-Yamithir is a language which is speak by the community which is the Australian Aboriginal community. Okay, and according to the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, they concluded that in case of the Yugo-Yamithir language, there is no such relative references. Like there is no word that can be equated to left, right, above, or below. They only use the cardinal directions like north, west, east, and south. So for example, they mostly make the sentences like, there is a fly on your northern knee. They don't say that the left leg or a left knee or right knee. They say northern knee, southern knee. Okay, so it means that they use the the absolute references in their ordinary conversations, and that's why according to this institute, according to this research, that the Yugo-Yamithir who speak the people who speak the Yugo-Yamithir language, they will view the cardinal directions differently as compared to the English speakers. So it means that the Yugo-Yamithir, they only speak the absolute references, so it means that they are more attuned, they are more prone, they are more receptive to the four directions than the people of the English language. Okay, so as the English language, they also have the absolute references, but they also have the relative references, and even in the time of the need, the English speakers, they use absolute and relative references in combination. But in case of the Yugo-Yamithir, there is no way out, there is no alternative. They have to use absolute references under all circumstances. So that's why, according to the Sapir hypothesis, this languages is actually compelling their perception towards the cardinal directions more rigid, more attuned as compared to the English speakers. So this is how, when we think about space and location differently when we speak different languages. Okay, so this is all about the Sapir Whorf hypothesis. Now, at the last, we will draw a summary by discussing the original words of the Sapir and Whorf, in which they have do discussion of this language and culture and the perception. So, according to Sapir and Whorf, these are the original words that I am quoting here. Language powerfully conditions all our thinking about social problems and the processes. These are according to the Sapir and Whorf words, that language powerfully conditions all our thinking, just as we discussed that we think of the nuts, the almonds, the walnuts, and the pecans as the connecting items, but the Spanish don't, because they don't have an overarching word as we have nuts in our language. Similarly, human beings don't live in an objective world alone, nor alone in the world of the social activity as ordinarily understood, but are very much at the mercy of a particular language which has become the medium of the expression for this society. It means that the human beings, they don't live in an objective world alone. They don't live in a world which is objective, subjective. Our perceptions, these are all subjective, depend on the language, which actually heavily influencing our perception towards things. So we are adding conventional meanings to particular symbols, and in that way it is leading to build up our perception towards things. And nor alone we are living in a world which is ordinarily understood. We are not living in a world which is objective, nor does our world is already understood. We have to make sense of it. And just because it is not something that has been already understood based on any objective criteria, and we have to make sense of it, so that's why the people who speak different languages will make sense of the world differently. But we are very much rely at the mercy of the particular language which has become the medium of the expression for this society. So the fact of the matter is that the real world is to a large extent unconsciously built up on the language habits of the group. As we have discussed in case of the Cameroon tribal group, there wasn't any single word in their language to illustrate snow. Okay, so they were believing that the snow isn't a reality. So it means that the real world, the concept of the real world is subjective. It depends on the people who speak different languages, and it is that how you what you view as real and what you view as unreal depends on your language also. So the fact of the matter is the real world is to a large extent unconsciously built up on the language habits of the group. Okay. And the worlds in which different societies live, they are distinct worlds. Why are they distinct worlds? Because the perceptions are different. How we perceive the things are different, just because we are speaking different languages. Not merely the same world with different labels attached. We have different societies that are considered as different worlds, and we have different worlds because we have different labels that have been attached to different things in our surrounding. We make sense of things differently just because that we are speaking different languages. So it is actually, it actually leads to the formation of different kinds of words, the isolated words. For the English speaker, the world is different. For Spanish speaker, the world is different. For Urdu speaker, it is different. For Hindi speaker, it is different because they are making the perception or the making sense of the things differently just because they are speaking different languages. This is the original words of the Sapir Whorf hypothesis that I have quoted here. Now the other thing is that what is the importance of Sapir hypothesis? Who cares that there is a word in Cameroon tribe for snow or not? Either there is what the Spanish think of nuts. What is the importance of this whole discussion? According to Sapir hypothesis, as it is compelling us to think of the world differently, because the Sapir hypothesis believed that those who speak different languages will see the world differently. So in that way, once we grab this concept, we will be able to understand all the miscommunications and the misperceptions, and we will be able to understand that how the other people, they interpret the things differently that I am interpreting in a particular way. So it will actually help us to resolve our conflicts, to understand the miscommunication and to understand the misperception. This is one of the primary importance of the Sapir hypothesis, to understand the linguistic differences and to understand the perception that has been brought in by the linguistic differences in our culture. Then limitations. All the Sapir hypothesis consider one of the milestone theory in the linguistic anthropology and also in sociology, but it has many limitations also. The Sapir hypothesis believed that it is the language that affects our perception, but it is not solely the language according to critiques. There are also other things like the socializing agents, the role of the family, the role of the institutions, the role of the education institution. These all are the external and the internal factors. There are various factors that shape our perception. It is not solely the language that is shaping our perception. So we can't just draw a sweeping generalization that people who speak different languages will obviously see each and every aspect of the world differently. It's not like this according to critics, because there is also a role of the family, the education, the political institutions also, so which has been neglected by the Sapir and Whorf. And the other thing, according to Whorf, Sapir hypothesis, that if you don't have a word in your language for a particular concept, you will not able to get that. As we have discussed in a tribal Cameroon community where there was a word for the snow, so they weren't able to get the concept. According to the critiques, how can we apply the Sapir hypothesis to the innovators? Because innovators first think of the object and then they label it. How is then the human, they are able to think out of box? So the Sapir hypothesis failed to address the behavior of the innovators, because if we can't understand the concepts because we don't have word for it, then how is it that our language is getting expanded day by day? And how is it that the innovators, they are leading to different inventions and discoveries? Because the innovators, they think of the new idea, something new that which hasn't a word already in our language. So how are they then able to think of the new things? So innovators, they first think of the word and then they label it. They do not first give a label and add a word for it in our language and then they make a thing. It's not like this. Okay, so the other limitation is that linguistic changes or replacement are far slower than the changes in a worldview. If we believe that the language and the worldviews, they are tightly intertwined, as it has been stated by the Sapir and Whorf hypothesis, then why is it that the linguistic changes are far slower than the changes in the perceptions of the worldview? The worldview perceptions, they can change rapidly. Our point of view and perceptions change abruptly as compared to the linguistic changes. So this is how these are the issues which hasn't been addressed by the Sapir hypothesis. And the fourth limitation is that although the language, for example, if we consider the Sapir hypothesis is true under all circumstances that the language determine our perception, but at individual level, my own capacity as an individual, like the rational thinking, the critical thinking, the creative thinking, it has also been contributed to shape my perception towards the things. So what is the role of the thinking skills has been neglected by the Sapir Whorf hypothesis. Okay, so these are the limitations which have been drawn by the critics to the Sapir Whorf hypothesis. Then at the last, we will conclude the Sapir hypothesis. If we conclude it and summarize into 4 or 5 sentences, what would be that? First is that, according to Sapir Whorf, language not only expresses our thoughts and ideas, but it also shapes the way we think about ideas. It means that it is shaping our perception. And also that when we learn a language, it means that we are not only learning words, but we are also learning the thinking and the perceiving, the ways of perceiving. It means that, for example, if you are learning English language, you are not just learning phonemes, phonetics and morphology and semantics and the semantics of that, but you are also learning that how the English speakers, they are perceiving things. So you are, that's why it leads to the wider perception of the people who speak different languages. And then, according to Sapir and Whorf, it is our language that determines our consciousness and hence our perception of the objects and events. Means that how we make sense of our surrounding, it is all shaped by our language. And if our language has a word for something, like it might be an object or a kind of person, an emotion, a natural feature of the landscape, then those who know the language tend to think it is real. And if they don't have a word for it, they will think it is not real. Like in case of the Cameroon tribal community, where there wasn't a word for snow, so they don't believe that it is real. Okay, so in order to think of a particular event or for a particular item, or either it's a feeling, or either it's an emotion, or either it's a kind of person, or either it's an object, or either it's a natural feature of the landscape, in order to think of it as a real, you must have a word for it. This is all the summary or the conclusion which I have drawn for the Sapir hypothesis. So this is all about the language, culture, and their connection, the Sapir hypothesis, which actually shed light on this relationship of the culture and language. So this was the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for watching, and leave your questions in a comment section below, and like, share and subscribe our channel for latest lectures. Thank you.